Jayne, you can unmute your mic. It gives me great delight to welcome you to the Creative Arts Conference. Everyone, Jayne is an award-winning South African theatre director, and we're really looking forward to what you have to share with us today. So over to you, Jayne. Please take it away. Can you unmute your mic, Jayne? Jayne, can you hear me? Let's see on that side. Apologies, everyone. We're just getting ourselves together here.
Hello.
Oh, there we go. Great.
Hey,
Hi,
Pam,
Jayne. Lovely
I don't know if that's the case for
Are you
other
ready
people.
to go? Yeah, are you ready to go, Jayne? We heard you for a sec there. Is your mic unmuted? I wonder if we can just refresh. Let's just see what's going on here. So apologies, everyone. We're just going to sort this out.
I can hear you now, Pam.
Oh, there we go. Great. You ready to carry on, Jayne?
Sure. Can you see my screen that's sharing?
Yes, we can. That's great. Yeah, over to you.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you for that little minor hiccup, everyone, and welcome. And thank you so much for being present with me here today and making time on a Friday after work hours to talk and discuss around getting inclusive. My name is Jayne Batzofin. I'm a freelance theatre director and designer, and I've been working in making inclusive theatre since 2009. And my inclusive theatre is inclusive in a variety of ways. I predominantly make work for very young audiences, and this is considered between the ages of 3 to 7 years old. And I particularly make theatre for those who use South African Sign Language as their means of communication. But I've also made work for 14 years and up that make use of an inclusive cast. So there are dancers who are both deaf and wheelchair users, as well as using puppets that are wheelchair users, and various ways of thinking around inclusion in creative ways. And that's a little bit of background to who I am and what I will be sharing today. But before I get going, and I hope there is a way that there is a chat or a function that people can share, because I'd like to begin with a question. And my question is to everyone here, even though I feel like I'm just talking to the computer screen, is what does belonging mean to you? So outside, don't think yet you're attending a talk around inclusion. What does belonging mean to you? You can either write a sentence, you can write a few words, maybe you want to write a feeling. I'd like to give a minute, 2 minutes just for this exercise for people to write down what does belonging mean to you? So I'm just going to give us a few moments to do that.
Jayne, we have got a chat on the side. I don't know if you can see that. On the right-hand side of your screen, you can see that it's got Q&A, and it's going mad.
So some of the comments that we're getting through is having a place to be seen, being heard, being supported, acceptance, connected with others, acceptance from others, being understood, being heard, again, accepted. Oh, this is a wonderful one as well, being valued, having a place, again, accepted. I'm seeing accepted a lot, being acknowledged, a place where I can be myself. being part of a community and appreciated by those that surround you. These are wonderful. Oh, not being judged, feeling safe, being authentic, being included. These are wonderful words that we're using. I'm just going to give another 30 to 40 seconds for those of you who are just taking a bit more time or need a bit more time. What does it mean to me to belong? Safe. Love is mentioned there, being myself, feeling safe and comfortable, not feeling judged. Happiness. Happiness is wonderful. Oh, being loved unconditionally. Oh, these things are making me feel wonderful on a Friday evening. Unity, being part of a team. Loved is coming up again. Okay, these are wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing those. It's lovely to hear and to read, should I say. So this is how you as an adult in your own capacity, how you or what belonging means to you. So I just want us to hold that in the back before we start talking about the inclusive practices. And I'd like to begin with a little anecdote of when we took a show to a deaf school in KwaZulu-Natal. It's an amazing school, wonderfully resourced, beautiful teachers. And we went there for a residency. And the first day, we just played simple activities with the children to promote sign language literacy. And on the second day, we performed this play called What Goes Up. And on the third day, we had a bit of a feedback session with the learners to understand what they enjoyed or didn't enjoy about the play. And so we presented them with this piece of paper, and at the top it said, draw your favorite part of the play. And we handed out the piece of paper, and we put out a variety of cookies that the children could choose which color they wanted. And as we were doing this, there was a teacher seated with one of the students, and the teacher was hearing, and she turned to me and spoke to me and said, listen, I'm with this one student, and she was referring to a student sitting in front of her. And she said, not only is she deaf, but she has multiple learning disabilities or learning challenges. So please don't be surprised if she draws nothing on the piece of paper. She'll just scribble. And this teacher spoke for about 4 or 5 minutes, explaining how we shouldn't expect much from the student and that it's okay. And in those 4 to 5 minutes, we looked down, and this is what the child had drawn. Now, I also understand that for people outside of context of the play might see nothing, but I'd like to share one that the play was predominantly in shades and colors of blue. So already just the choice of color was interesting and indicates something to me. But second, we had multiple puppets that looked like this little rabbit over here. And I don't know about you, but for me, it became very evident what this child was really drawn to. And the teacher was most surprised and kind of shocked. And I don't think this anecdote is unique to me or to the work that I do. I think it's very common with theatre practitioners and facilitators working with young learners and not coming in sometimes with expectations or creating really spaces of belonging. I apologize, the alarm in the area that I'm working has currently gone off. I hope it's not too distracting as I keep talking. So I want to just take a step back, and I want us to acknowledge that everyone who is present in the space with us, not everyone understands what inclusion means or various topics around it or how to go about it. So I'd like us all to be on the same page as we begin. So there's a sector known as DEI or EDI, you might have heard as well, and this stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And diversity refers to the traits and characteristics that make people unique, right? I think everyone in this room is unique in a multitude of ways, and we can look later in this presentation about the different ways the children in your classroom will be diverse. Then we come to equity, which is about promoting justice and fairness within the procedures, processes, and distribution of resources by institutions or systems. And I just want to take a little moment here to acknowledge that equity and equality are not the same thing. So a lot of the time, I think a lot of schools have tried to go, oh, we treat the children all the same. Everyone's treated equally. And that's a wonderful place to start from. But as you can see from this image, and I'm sure some of you have seen this image many times, because of the diversity of children, not everyone has the same starting point. So if we give everyone one box, it doesn't help always. Equity is about giving people the resources they need in order to bring about equality in how they can access the space. And ultimately, we want liberation. We want to take down all the social barriers that exist in order for people to feel included. So that's equity. And inclusion refers to the behaviors and social norms that ensure people feel welcome. So you might go, okay, Jayne, I know all of this, but why mention diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I mention this because together they create this beautiful Venn diagram of understanding how we achieve belonging. And I want us just for a moment to think about all those things that we shared that made us feel like we belong. Think about, how do you create that in your classroom? There's this beautiful quote by Liz Faslin, and forgive me, I do not know how to pronounce their surname correctly if I am mispronouncing, but it's a beautiful quote. Diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. I'm just going to repeat that again. Diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. When we think about diversity, there's huge diversity in your classroom. Sometimes people think about inclusion only referring to students with like physical or learning challenges, but it really doesn't. It's a greater scope than that. So how are our students, our learners, our children unique in our classroom? How are they diverse? Well, language is one, their physical abilities, neurodiversity, their cognitive abilities, maybe their sexuality, their gender, their culture, their race. So there's a huge spectrum over here. And I know, and a question I get a lot is, how do I make sure everyone feels included, right? And that's a huge task. So let's jump to, what are the challenges of how we create inclusive spaces? The first one, which I think might be the most obvious, is the resources. So sometimes we're challenged because our school doesn't have money. Maybe as a teacher, I just don't have the time to go to all these kind of workshops or learning or doing my own reading, or I just don't have the expertise, nor can we be expected to have all of those kind of resources behind us. And different schools will obviously have different capacities or different resources available to them. Another challenge is the attitudes. And when I talk about attitudes, I mean your own as a facilitator, as a teacher, both the school's attitude and the guardians. So sometimes your attitudes, both the personal, school, and the guardians will align, and it becomes much easier to create and talk about inclusion. And sometimes there are schisms or there are chasms between those things. And maybe you are striving, you go, oh, I have a child in my classroom and I really want to include them, but the school doesn't create resources or give you capacity or upskill you. This is a major challenge I've experienced in schools. And then the other two challenges, and I really want to reassure everyone right now, is the thinking or the mentality of trying to do it all. So I get this a lot, like, I want to use the right language, I want to do the right activities, I want to make sure everyone's involved. And what happens is we create this very uneaseful way of how we approach the classroom, and it becomes even more difficult and challenging, and we burn out very quickly. So in that, and also trying to get everything right, we become really fearful. And that's my experience. And a lot in talking around inclusion is that people get so scared, oh, I'm not going to do everything right. And then they just don't start at all. So if anything you leave this presentation with, it's to really go acknowledge that you aren't going to get everything right and you can't do everything, but you can most certainly try. So again, I'd like to think of, so taking away doing everything and doing it all and depending what your needs of your students are, if you can remember two things from this talk as well, besides knowing that you're not going to get everything right, is these words of representation and access. So with representation, how are the children represented in the classrooms or materials, for example? For access, how do children access the classroom? As simple as getting through the door or getting to their seat or finding a spot on a carpet. And if there are problems in either of these ways, how can I modify and accommodate? So it's not that you have to change your lesson plans or change the way your materials. It's really about going, how can I maybe shift some tables? How can I go through a magazine and find more images that represent the children? And when in doubt, ask. If anything I've seen through this conference is there's this beautiful network now of teachers who want to create more wonderful, safe, creative spaces for their children. So with representation and access, again, it's not try and shift the mind frame from I'm creating an inclusive space to I'm creating a space of belonging. And this for me is the most important. We want the children to feel like they belong. And when children feel like they belong, then the fact that sometimes you might use the wrong language or you might not get it right, it will be okay because the children will be with you. They will feel safe enough to maybe go, no, that's not it, or no, I don't understand. So if we can create a space of belonging, those beautiful words you used earlier, feeling loved, feeling safe, feeling accepted, how do we create that environment so that together with the children, we find ways to accommodate and modify our teaching to reach them? So some ways of thinking about how we can create belonging in the classroom is as simple as how do I greet the children? So it's not to say that you have to do a bilingual or multilingual class all the time, but the greeting I find is so important because especially in this beautiful country of ours, most children don't have the same mother tongue language. So what is a way we can greet? And again, it doesn't even have to be verbal. There are a lot of children who are neurodiverse or on a spectrum, and sometimes it's a hand wave or it's a fist bump. Or it's developing your own way of greeting that makes them feel welcome before they've even stepped into the classroom. Thinking again, this is around representation, what books or toys are in the classroom, what images or posters are on the wall. And I'm trying to think, I know I've been to some schools where even putting things on the wall is asking sometimes too much. But I know there are wonderful NGOs who try and provide books. They're part of something called Book Dash, and they create books in all of the 11 official languages, and they can do that at no cost if your school needs. And I think there are ways to access resources. And then another one I think is relatively simple to do is how is the classroom set up? And this talks to physical access. So sometimes you might have a child who's a wheelchair user, and normally they get a designated seat, like you will sit over there. But sometimes we need to think, like sometimes a wheelchair user wants to be a naughty child that sits at the back, or they want to be able to access their other friends during a classroom. I know, especially with deaf learners, it's not just about physical access, but it's about linguistic access. So if children are seated in a row, they can't see each other. So if they turn around to see a student talk behind them, they don't know what the teacher is saying. So a usual typical setup in a deaf classroom is working in the round. So those are just a few ways of creating belonging classrooms, I would say. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen there for a moment. And I guess with our final moments, I'm just going to come back to the room, and let me put my video on so I can share my face. Hello, everyone. Are there any questions that have come out from the talk? I'm just also looking through the chat because I wasn't on the chat as I was presenting. There's a wonderful thing. If it is their space, they take ownership. Absolutely. I didn't mention as well, and what's quite interesting with also posters and putting things on the wall, is that sometimes I know with deaf children, because it's a visual language, if a space is too cluttered, they actually can't focus. So I find like the chalkboard or where you write, if you keep that quite clean, that the child can focus. Also neurodiverse children or children on a autistic spectrum, they can get overstimulated very, very quickly. So it's also about creating maybe a space in the classroom where there isn't a lot of stuff on the wall, in order for the child to have a space where they can almost zone out or they're not overstimulated. Right, I'm not seeing any particular questions coming up other than questions that were posted before the session. And these are wonderful questions. Chloe's was upvoted. How do I as a teacher cater to all inclusive needs, especially in a classroom with 40 learners with various needs? This is not a unique question. I know so many teachers and facilitators who are in this situation. And again, I think this comes to what I was talking about earlier, which is being cautious of doing it all, and making it, because when we do it all, it becomes a watered down version in a way. So I would say work in your classroom on making your children feel like they belong. And then with the needs of the children, maybe the guardian or the parent will also have a conversation with you. You can start to accommodate or modify certain activities for the learners, or if you set an activity and you find a learner is maybe lagging or not following in a way, that you can dedicate some time. But yeah, just also have patience with yourself. So I find the kind of patience and care that teachers hold for their children in their classes or their students in their classes, they don't hold for themselves necessarily. So they kind of beat themselves up, like I didn't do well, or I don't think everyone was involved all the time. Be gentle, take small steps, but take steps, would be my answer to that. How do you advise that learners don't get lost in the system or curriculum? It is so very difficult. The beauty of, and I was asked to pitch this to particularly primary school teachers, is that at this learning level is the most ideal way to be aware of these difficulties and track them in these kind of foundational phases of the child's learning. And if there's constant communication, both with the principal or with the guardians or parents, it's about creating that space of care. And that's how children don't fall through the cracks. But I also know a lot of the time the responsibility falls on the teachers, right? Constantly, not just to be provide the learning, but also the space of care and feeling loved. Because often kids who sit on the spectrum don't get it from home. And then the guardians or parents go, well, why aren't you working harder? There's no easy answer. I deeply wish I could say, if you do these simple 3 steps, at the clickbait of making an inclusive space, I wish I could do that. But every child's needs are very unique, and there is not a blanket activity or exercise that you can do to take care of all of them. Right. Are there any other questions? I'm seeing some beautiful comments. Thank you so much for sharing. A wonderful comment here from Rena. Let the children see their art on the walls. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Again, and was mentioned earlier, like how can the children take ownership of their space? Children feel safe if they know exactly where to find things and where to put it back, and keeping a classroom organized. Organized classrooms are very useful, especially with children who have neurodiverse needs. Again, speaking to that, there needs to be spaces that aren't very cluttered. Yeah. You must forgive me. It's a very strange experience being on a call where you can't see other faces and there's just a blank screen staring back at you.
I'm going to join you, Jayne, so you don't feel so lonely. But the comments that are on the side, I really hope you get a chance to go and read through them all, because your talk was so inspirational, and just the comments and I think the way you make people feel, you can clearly see that you're passionate about what you do. And I just think that any learner in your class is so blessed to have you as a teacher, or engage with you. You really are. You calm, you warm, and you made me feel like I belong. So I really appreciate you joining us today. And you can see, just look at the comments, they are flying in. So yeah, it was really lovely. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you everyone again for making the capacity, the time, the emotional availability on a Friday evening to be here and be present with each other.
Yeah, I'm just looking, 135 people have joined us, and yeah, thank you to everyone. I think we could have listened to you for ages, so it's really is just appreciative, and thanks again.
Only a pleasure, and thank you everyone.
All the best. Have a lovely weekend, Jayne.
You too. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Bye. And to everyone that's still on the chat, we just want to say thank you very much for joining us today. Wow, I've had an amazing day. I hope that you've had a lovely day too. And I've learned a lot, and I'm sure you have as well. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We kick off at 9 o'clock, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Have a lovely evening.